Prabhupada-lilamrita, is that okay? No objections? Everyone finished their 16 rounds? Oh, I see. Okay. Jai Shri Mohan Prabhu. Hare Krishna Malati. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. I don't suppose any of you have heard of a devotee from Croatia called Hanuman Das, who's very critical. No, that's okay. Don't worry. You're better off not knowing. He passed away. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Tyadesha Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripas sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, Srila Prabhupada is still at Stinson Beach, San Francisco, trying to recover following his stroke or mild heart attack. But it's difficult, and therefore shortly he's going to go to India. Some evenings Prabhupada would speak or arrange debates, although Kirtanananda was constantly cautioning. When Prabhupada wanted to speak, it was impossible for any of his disciples to stop him. Sometimes he would ask Kirtanananda to debate with one of the visiting devotees. One devotee would argue for the impersonalists or atheists' position, and the other would argue for the Krishna-conscious position. Prabhupada would judge. But no sooner would the argument begin than Prabhupada would interrupt, take the position of the devotee, and defeat the atheistic or impersonalistic argument. The devotees loved it. Prabhupada was unable to confine himself either to the role of a silent judge or to that of a recuperating patient. Why do we concentrate on the impersonalists? Kirtanananda asked. Why do we attack them so much? Why don't we concentrate our attack on the atheists? You say that because you are an impersonalist, Prabhupada answered angrily. Wow. On another occasion, Prabhupada explained that non-devotees who mislead the innocent public are demons and should be exposed. Kirtanananda objected. Krishna, if we call them demons, they'll never come around. But they are demons, Prabhupada replied. But we can't call them demons, Swamiji. Yes, they are demons. Unless you understand this point, you will not make advancement in Krishna consciousness. Sure, that's powerful. Can demons become devotees? Kirtanananda asked. Oh yes, Prabhupada answered. If they chant Hare Krishna and render service, even demons become devotees. Most of the devotees had to remain in San Francisco, hoping for a chance to visit Swamiji. From the few who knew firsthand, they heard about Swamiji's plans to leave for India, perhaps never to return. It was painful to hear. His going almost to death, but then returning by Krishna's grace and rejoining them in San Francisco, yet being unable to stay with them as before. And now his plans of going to India may be forever. These activities intensified their concern and love for him. Devotees worried, speculating on whether they could carry on without Swamiji. One devotee suggested that perhaps one of Swamiji's godbrothers could come to America and fill in for Swamiji, and if the worst happened, take over the leadership of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. When the suggestion reached Prabhupada, he considered it without immediately replying. Mukunda. I was sitting alone with Swamiji in his room, and he was very grave and silent. His eyes were closed. Then suddenly tears began flowing from his eyes, and he said in a choked voice, "My spiritual master was no ordinary spiritual master." Then he paused for some time, and wiping the tears from his cheeks, he said in an even more choked voice, "He saved me." At that point, I began to understand the meaning of spiritual master and dropped all consideration of ever replacing Swamiji. Unquote. After 2 days, Prabhupada said he would not call any of his godbrothers to come and take care of his disciples. He said, if this person speaks just one word different from what I'm speaking, there will be great confusion among you. Actually, he said, the idea was an insult to the spiritual master. Prabhupada said that he would initiate the new followers in San Francisco and asked that they come one at a time and stay overnight. Without performing any fire ceremonies, he simply talked with each new person, asking him to follow the 4 rules and chant 16 rounds a day. When the follower promised, Prabhupada initiated him sitting on the bed while the disciples sat before him on the floor. Prabhupada would chant quietly on the disciples' beads and then give him or her a spiritual name. One day, one of the new candidates for initiation came in very nervously and bowed down before Prabhupada. The boy didn't get up. You can get up now, Prabhupada said. So you want to be initiated? The boy said yes and began chanting, not knowing what else to say. I'll chant on your beads, Prabhupada said. After chanting for 10 minutes, he returned them, saying, "Your name is Aniruddha." "What does that mean?" the boy asked. "He's the grandson of Krishna. Do you have any questions?" Aniruddha couldn't think of anything. He had already forgotten his name, and Prabhupada said he could go. Later, Prabhupada called for Aniruddha, but Aniruddha didn't know that it was his name being called. Aniruddha. Oh, Aniruddha, Kirtanananda said, and looked at him. "Swamiji is calling you." Another boy who came out received the name Uddhava. The next day, as Prabhupada was sitting in the yard, he called, "Kirtanananda, Upendra, Uddhava." He wanted to read them a verse he had encountered while studying Srimad Bhagavatam. Kirtanananda and Upendra came and sat at Prabhupada's feet. "Oh, where is Uddhava?" Prabhupada asked. Upendra told him that Uddhava had gone up to the hills to look at the cows and chant to them. Upendra thought that Swamiji would be pleased to hear that his new disciple had climbed the hills just to chant to the cows. But Prabhupada shook his head unhappily. Restlessness. He had wanted the new boy to hear the verse. Jayati Jayati Devo, Devaki Nandanoso, Jayati Jayati Krishna, Vrishni Vangsha Pradipa, Jayati Jayati Megha, Shamala Kamalango, Jayati Jayati Prithvi, Baranasho Mukunda. Prabhupada gave the translation. All glories to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is known as the son of Devaki. All glories to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the light of the Vrishni dynasty. All glories to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose bodily luster is like that of a new cloud, and whose body is as soft as lotus flowers. All glories to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who walks on the planet Earth to deliver the world from the scorn of demons, and who can offer liberation to everyone. After repeating the Sanskrit and the translation, he told them they could return to their duties. Prabhupada told Kirtanananda he had definitely decided to go to India via New York as soon as possible. Kirtanananda packed Swamiji's things and drove Swamiji down to San Francisco to spend the night at the temple. They would leave the next morning. The temple and even Prabhupada's apartment were very hectic that night, with many devotees and guests wanting to see Prabhupada, and dozens of people wanting initiation. When Kirtanananda advised Prabhupada not to exert himself by going down for the evening program, Prabhupada insisted on at least going and sitting during the kirtan. When he entered the storefront, the devotees immediately stopped their kirtan, dropping down to offer obeisances. There was a hush. He commanded a new reverence. This might be the last time they would see him. They watched him during the kirtan as he played his kartals, singing with them for the last time. The uninitiated wanted to accept him as their spiritual master tonight, before it was too late. Srila Prabhupada asked for the microphone. No one had expected him to speak. Kirtanananda, the only person in a position to restrain him, said nothing and sat before him like the others, submissive and expectant. Prabhupada spoke quietly about his mission. Under the order of his spiritual master, he was bringing Lord Chaitanya's movement to America, and Krishna had kindly sent him so many sincere souls. I have a few children in India from my family days, he said, but you are my real children. Now I'm going to India for a little while. Everyone fixed his attention on Swamiji as he sat before them, leaning against the madras-covered wall, speaking softly. Suddenly the door opened, and Ravindra Swarup, oh, it's a different one. You're a much better one. I mean, this Ravindra Swarup, I tell you what. Anyway, you'll see it in a moment. So suddenly the door opened and Ravindra Swarup unhappily entered, not like you. Big smile. Everyone knew that Ravindra Swarup wanted to leave Krishna consciousness. He hadn't taken his initiation vows seriously. He wanted to move on. He didn't want a spiritual master anymore. The other devotees had discouraged him, but he had persisted. They were incredulous. How could he do such a thing on the night before Swamiji's departure? Ravindra Swarup fell to the floor to offer obeisances, but he didn't rise up. Instead, he began crawling on his hands and knees towards Prabhupada. Ravindra usually had a cavalier manner, enhanced by a handsome face, long tousled hair and a beard, but now he was wretched and sobbing and crazy. He crawled towards Prabhupada, who sat but 2 steps off the floor on the simple redwood dais. Prabhupada looked at him with compassion. "Come here, my boy." Ravindra crawled up the steps and placed his bushy head on Prabhupada's lap. Moved, the devotees watched as Prabhupada stroked Ravindra's head, and the boy cried and cried. "What's wrong, my son? You don't have to be so unhappy." Ravindra bawled out, "I want," he sobbed, reach God directly without anyone in between." Prabhupada continued to pat and stroke the boy's head. "No, you continue to stay with us if possible. Don't be a crazy fellow." Ravindra's weeping subsided, and Prabhupada continued, speaking both to Ravindra and to the emotion-struck group in the room. "I'm an old man," he said. "I may die at any moment. But please, you all carry on the Sankirtan movement. You have to become humble and tolerant. As Lord Chaitanya says, be as humble as a blade of grass and more tolerant than a tree. You must have enthusiasm and patience to push on this Krishna-conscious philosophy." Suddenly, Ravindra's tears were gone. He jumped up, dejectedly stood, hesitating for a moment, and then hurried out the door, banging it behind him. Ravindra Swarup's dramatic exit from Krishna consciousness shocked the devotees. I'm sure he was under the influence of LSD. I mean, to go that wild, He must be. Prabhupada sat still and continued speaking to them gravely, asking them to stick together and push on the movement for their own benefit and for others. Whatever they had learned, he said, they should repeat. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that they were part of a preaching mission, a movement. They were together not just for good times and good vibrations. They had a loving obligation to Swamiji and Krishna. Prabhupada returned to his apartment, which soon became chaotic. It was late. Many people wanted initiation. Mukunda, Jayananda, and other temple leaders tried to determine which candidates were sincere. They selected candidates, half a dozen at a time, and allowed them into Prabhupada's room. Prabhupada sat behind his little desk, chanted on each person's beads and returned them, giving each person a spiritual name. Kirtanananda requested him to stop. Further initiations could be done through the mail. But Prabhupada said he would continue initiating whoever was present. Mukunda and Jayananda set priorities. Some persons had been waiting months to be initiated and were obviously sincere. Others would have to be turned away. John Carter. At the end of the lecture, I was sure that I wanted to be initiated. And even though there was some talk of being initiated by mail, I knew I wanted to have that personal connection with my spiritual master and be personally initiated by him, personally accepted. I ran up to Mukunda and said, "How many are on the list? I would like to get on the list." He said, "Well, Swamiji isn't really taking them in any particular order. We're just going to try to pick out the most sincere people. Please put my name on the list," I said. "I'm really sincere. I really want to get initiated." So he put me down and took the list up to Swamiji. And Swamiji began calling for people one by one. After the third person, when my name wasn't called, I became a little worried. And then after the fourth person, I was really sitting on edge. Then when they called the fifth person and it wasn't me, I was totally destroyed. I felt, oh, he's going to India. And then he's going back to Krishna. I just lost my chance. This is it. There's no use in me living anymore. I was trying to make it to the coat rack and get my coat and get out before anyone could see me crying. I hadn't started crying, but I could tell it was coming. A couple of people patted me on the back and said, "It's all right. He can write you a letter and tell you your name." All I could think was, yeah, the way he was talking tonight, it may never happen. I could barely stand up. I went outside and started walking across the parking lot towards Golden Gate Park. I was kind of heading towards the Golden Gate Bridge. I thought, I'll just jump off. I hadn't been there long enough to understand that if you commit suicide, you have to become a ghost. I just figured my life was useless. I got about halfway across the parking lot when the idea struck me. What if he decided to take one more and I was out here somewhere? The thought filled me with so much hope that I turned around and ran back to the temple. And just as I walked in the front of the temple, Janaki ran down and said, "He'll take one more." And she grabbed somebody else and ran up the stairs. Oh, Krishna. I felt my knees start to collapse and tears came jutting out of my eyes. Harsharani was standing there and she grabbed me by the arm and said, "Come with me." She raced up the stairs, pulling me to the top, and burst into Swamiji's room without even knocking. Swamiji looked up with amazement. She said, "Swamiji, you have to initiate this boy." Oh, Krishna, it's just amazing. "Swamiji, you have to initiate this boy." I was just bawling, and Swamiji began to laugh. He said, "It's all right. Don't cry. Everything will be all right." He chanted on my beads and gave me the name Jivananda. The next morning, Prabhupada had to leave his affectionate followers. Several cars filled with devotees accompanied him to the San Francisco airport. Nandarani. Some were sincere and some were crying because it was appropriate to cry when the spiritual master leaves. Actually, none of us really knew much about what the spiritual master was. Janaki mischievously stole the ticket and passport from Prabhupada's hand. "Now you can't go," she said. "That's all right," he smiled. "I already have my boarding ticket. I am Indian. They will let me into my own country." Prabhupada turned to his adoring followers, gathered close around him at the boarding gate. "Actually, I have only one desire, and whoever does this will please me very much. Now I have a temple in New York, in Montreal, and a temple in San Francisco, but I do not have any temple in Los Angeles." He told them to remain in Krishna consciousness and to please preach. They watched as he turned and walked through the gate, his cane in one hand, boarding pass in the other. In New York, there was hardly time for sadness. Srila Prabhupada telegraphed Sri Krishna Pandit that his arrival in Delhi would be on July 24th at 7:30 a.m. and that Sri Krishna Pandit should prepare Prabhupada's quarters at the Chippiwada temple. In the telegram, Prabhupada mentioned his intention to consult a physician in Delhi and then go to Vrindavan. He was anxious to return to Vrindavan. The day before his departure, Prabhupada wrote to Sumati Maharaji. In reply to his last letter, she had agreed to provide free steamship passage to India for him, but not for his disciples. "As I had arranged for your passage to America," she had written, "I think it is my duty to see that you return back to India safely, more so due to your indifferent health." But she would not allow free passage for any disciples. On July 20th, Prabhupada wrote to her, "I'm feeling too much to return to Vrindavan, to the lotus feet of Vrindavan Bihari Lord Krishna, and therefore I've decided to return to India immediately. I would have liked to return via sea, as you've so kindly offered me passage in your letter, but in my precarious state of health, that is not possible. So by the mercy of Krishna And through one friend here, somehow or other, I've received air passage, and I'm expected to leave here for New Delhi on Saturday next, reaching the Palam airport on the 24th instant at 7:30 a.m. From there I shall proceed to Vrindavan after a few days' rest in Delhi. I can understand that at present you cannot allow free passage to my disciples, but if you don't do so, at least in the near future, then my mission will be half finished or failure. I'm just enclosing one letter of appreciation from one of my principal students, Bruce Scharf, that's Brahmananda, from Professor Davis Heron, and another from Professor Roberts of New York University. I think these letters will convince you how much my movement of Krishna consciousness is taking ground in the Western world. The holy name of Hare Krishna is now being chanted not only in this country, but also in England, Holland, and Mexico. That I know of. It may be even more widespread. I've sent you one gramophone record, which I hope you may have received by this time. You will enjoy to learn how Krishna's holy name is being appreciated by the Western world. Okay, devotees. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. We will continue tomorrow. Thank you.
Come tomorrow and pick up the I'll not be tomorrow.
Oh, I see. Okay.